Clara Bennett was a young woman with dreams much bigger than her paycheck could handle. At just 26 years old, she worked long hours at Ruby's Place, a small diner tucked into a quiet corner of Austin, Texas. The diner wasn't fancy, just red vinyl booths, cracked tables, and a jukebox that played old country songs. But it had heart. And Clara? She gave everything she had to make ends meet. Her curly brown hair was always tied back in a messy bun, and her sneakers were scuffed from running between tables all day. Life hadn't been easy for Clara. Her mom was sick, bills piled up faster than she could pay them, and every night ended with her wondering how much longer she could keep going. But despite it all, Clara never let her struggles show. She smiled through the chaos, cracking jokes with customers and making sure everyone felt welcome. One rainy Tuesday evening, the kind of night where the streets shimmered under flickering streetlights and the air smelled like wet pavement, something changed. The bell above the diner door jingled as it swung open, letting in a gust of cold wind and rain. Everyone glanced up briefly before returning to their meals. It was just a boy, skinny, maybe 10 or 11, soaked to the bone and clutching an old backpack. He stood there hesitating, looking lost and unsure. Clara noticed him right away. Something about the way he clutched his backpack, a tattered thing held together with duct tape, made her chest tighten. Without thinking twice, she grabbed a menu and walked over. "Hey there, kiddo," she said warmly. "You look like you could use a hot meal." The boy shook his head quickly, avoiding eye contact. "I'm fine, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice barely audible over the hum of chatter around them. Clara didn't buy it. "Well, you don't look fine to me," she teased gently. "How about some soup? On the house." Before he could protest, Clara turned toward the kitchen, already calling out the order. As she moved, she caught sight of a man sitting alone in the corner booth. He looked older, maybe in his late 40s, with sharp features softened by the dim light. His coffee sat untouched, and his eyes were locked on her and the boy. For a split second, their gazes met, and Clara felt a strange chill run down her spine. But then the moment passed, and she refocused on the task at hand. Little did she know, that simple act of kindness would set off a chain reaction neither she nor anyone else could have predicted. Clara slid a steaming bowl of chicken noodle soup in front of the boy and placed a thick slice of buttered bread on the side. "Here you go, kiddo," she said with a warm smile. "Eat up." The boy hesitated, his wide eyes darting around the diner as if waiting for someone to tell him this was all a mistake. But when he finally picked up the spoon and took his first bite, his shoulders relaxed, and a small, grateful smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "You got a name?" Clara asked, leaning against the counter nearby. "Ethan," he mumbled between bites, still not meeting her eyes. "Well, Ethan, I'm Clara, and don't worry about paying for this, okay? Just enjoy it." Ethan nodded silently, but there was something in his expression, gratitude mixed with relief, that made Clara's heart ache. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Some stories didn't have to be told out loud to be understood. As Ethan ate, Clara glanced over at the man in the corner booth again. He hadn't moved since she'd noticed him earlier, but now he seemed even more focused on her and Ethan. His sharp blue eyes studied them intently, like he was piecing together a puzzle. For a moment, Clara wondered who he was and why he was watching so closely. Was he a reporter? A cop? Or just another customer passing through? She shook off the thought and went back to work, refilling coffee cups and dropping checks on tables. But every time she passed the corner booth, she felt his gaze lingering on her. It wasn't creepy or unsettling. It was curious, almost admiring. Still, it left her wondering what he wanted. By the time Ethan finished his meal, the rain outside had slowed to a drizzle. He stood up slowly, clutching his backpack tightly. "Thank you, Miss Clara," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome, Ethan," Clara replied, ruffling his damp hair playfully. "Take care of yourself, all right?" He nodded once before hurrying out the door, disappearing into the night. Clara watched him go, hoping whatever storm he was facing would pass soon. Meanwhile, the man in the corner booth finally stirred. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a leather wallet, and left $100 bill on the table before standing up to leave. As he passed Clara on his way out, he paused for a moment. "That was quite something you did back there," he said, his voice low and measured. Clara blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "The boy. Feeding him like that. Most people wouldn't have bothered." Clara shrugged, brushing off the compliment. "It's just soup. No big deal." The man gave her a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe not to you, but to him, it might have meant everything." Before Clara could respond, he turned and walked out the door, leaving her standing there with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside her. Who was that guy? And why did his words linger in her mind long after he was gone? Over the next few days, Clara couldn't shake the memory of that rainy night, or the mysterious man who'd watched her feed Ethan. Life kept moving forward, though, and she didn't have time to dwell on it. Between juggling shifts at the diner and caring for her mom, Clara barely had a moment to herself. But then, something unexpected happened. A week later, the same man reappeared at the diner, but this time he looked different. Gone was the tailored coat and polished shoes. Instead, he wore faded jeans, a flannel shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. If Clara hadn't recognized his piercing blue eyes, she might not have known it was him. He sat at the counter this time, ordering black coffee and a slice of cherry pie. When Clara approached to drop off his check, he spoke without looking up. "You ever think about how one act of kindness can ripple out into the world?" he asked casually, stirring sugar into his coffee. Clara frowned, unsure where this was going. "I guess." "Why?" He shrugged, still avoiding her gaze. "Just curious. Seems like you've got a knack for it." Before she could press him further, he paid his tab and left, leaving behind another generous tip. This pattern continued over the next several weeks. Each time, he showed up looking like a completely different person. A truck driver, a college professor, even a tourist. And each time, he observed Clara quietly, asking cryptic questions and leaving large tips. At first, Clara thought he was just some eccentric regular. But the more she saw him, the more she began to wonder, what did he want from her? Little did she know this man, Daniel Harper, wasn't just any customer. He was a billionaire tech mogul who had built an empire from nothing. But success had come at a cost. Over the years, Daniel had grown disconnected from the very humanity that had fueled his rise. Watching Clara's selflessness reignited something in him, a longing to reconnect with the values he'd once held dear. And Clara? She had no idea how much her simple act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. Over the next few weeks, Daniel Harper became a regular at Ruby's place. Well, sort of. He wasn't one regular, he was many. One day, he'd show up as a gruff truck driver with grease-stained hands and a flannel shirt. The next, he'd be an elderly man in suspenders, reading glasses perched on his nose, sipping coffee while pretending to study a newspaper. Another time, he came in as a college professor with a tweed jacket and leather briefcase, scribbling notes in a worn-out notebook. Each disguise was different, but one thing remained constant. His sharp blue eyes never missed a detail. He watched Clara like a hawk, observing every interaction she had with customers, co-workers, and even strangers who wandered into the diner. What fascinated him most wasn't just her kindness. It was how effortless it seemed. One afternoon, a frazzled mom with 2 screaming toddlers spilled an entire tray of drinks across the floor. Instead of rolling her eyes or snapping at them, Clara knelt down beside the kids, handing them napkins and making silly faces until they giggled. "Accidents happen," she told the mom with a reassuring smile. "No worries. I've got this." Another night, a group of rowdy teenagers left without tipping after running Clara ragged for hours. She sighed but didn't complain. When one of her co-workers muttered under their breath about how rude they were, Clara simply said, "They're probably just having a rough day. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes." But it wasn't just her patience that impressed Daniel. It was her willingness to go above and beyond, even when no one was looking. Late one evening, an older woman named Mrs. Peterson came in alone. She ordered a slice of apple pie and sat quietly by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked streets. Clara noticed right away that something was off. "You okay, Mrs. P?" Clara asked gently, setting down a fresh cup of tea. Mrs. Peterson hesitated before shaking her head. "Not really, dear. My arthritis is acting up again, and my daughter hasn't called in days. I think she's forgotten about me." Clara pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "She hasn't forgotten you," she said firmly. "She's probably just busy. But if you ever need anything, groceries, errands, someone to talk to, you call me. All right? I'll come by." Mrs. Peterson's eyes filled with tears. "You're too kind, Clara. You deserve better than this place." Clara smiled softly. "This place is fine. Besides, I like helping people. Makes the world feel a little brighter. You know?" Daniel, sitting nearby disguised as a construction worker, felt a lump rise in his throat. Those words echoed in his mind long after he left the diner that night. Meanwhile, Clara's life outside the diner was anything but bright. Her mom's health continued to decline, and the medical bills piled higher each week. The landlord had already sent 2 eviction notices, and Clara knew it was only a matter of time before she ran out of options. One particularly brutal morning, she woke up to find her car wouldn't start. After calling a tow truck and shelling out money she didn't have, she arrived at work late, exhausted and on the verge of tears. "Rough day?" her coworker Mia asked sympathetically as they prepped for the lunch rush. "You could say that," Clara muttered, tying her apron around her waist. Just then, a group of businessmen walked in, suits pressed and ties perfectly knotted. They took over half the tables, demanding complicated orders and complaining loudly about everything from the Wi-Fi signal to the temperature of their coffee. By the time Clara finally caught a break, she collapsed onto a stool in the back, rubbing her temples. That's when Daniel appeared again, this time dressed as a delivery guy with a clipboard in hand. "I'm here for the invoice," he said casually, handing her a fake form to sign. Clara glanced at it briefly before scrawling her name. "Here you go." As he turned to leave, he paused. "You look tired," he remarked, his tone softer than usual. Clara forced a laugh. "Story of my life." He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Why do you keep doing it, then? All this helping people, working yourself to the bone. Doesn't seem worth it." Clara shrugged. "Because it is. Someone's gotta care, right? If I don't step up, who will?" Her answer lingered in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Daniel nodded slowly, then walked out the door, leaving Clara wondering why this stranger kept showing up, and why he cared so much about her answers. Despite her struggles, Clara refused to give up. Every day, she showed up to work with a smile, determined to make the best of whatever came her way. And every day, Daniel watched, growing more intrigued by her resilience. But as the weeks went on, he began to realize something. Clara wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. Not financially, of course. Her bank account was practically empty. But emotionally, spiritually, she radiated strength. She found joy in the smallest moments, whether it was sharing a laugh with a customer or watching the sunrise on her way to work. And yet, Daniel couldn't ignore the weight she carried. The stress of her mom's illness, the looming threat of eviction, the endless sacrifices she made for others. It was crushing her bit by bit. It was time to act. It started with a letter. One chilly Thursday morning, as Clara unlocked the diner's front door, she noticed an envelope tucked under the handle. Her name was written neatly on the front in bold black ink. Frowning, she opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The words hit her like a freight train. "Dear Clara, this is to inform you that all outstanding debts associated with your account have been settled in full. Additionally, arrangements have been made for your mother's medical care at St. Jude's Hospital, effective immediately. No further action is required on your part. Sincerely, a friend." Clara stared at the letter, her hands trembling. For a moment, she thought it was some kind of cruel prank. But the official logo at the top of the page, St. Jude's Hospital, and the detailed breakdown of payments listed below left no room for doubt. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the steps outside the diner, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. Who would do this? And why? At first, she suspected Mia, her coworker who'd become a close friend over the years. But when she showed her the letter later that day, Mia looked just as shocked as Clara felt. "I wish I could say I did it," Mia admitted, hugging her tightly. "But whoever this friend is, they're a saint." Clara spent the rest of the week searching for answers. She called the hospital, hoping to trace the source of the donation, but they refused to disclose any information, citing confidentiality agreements. Desperate, she scoured her memories for anyone who might have the means and the motive to help her. Then it hit her. The man in the corner booth, the truck driver, the professor, the delivery guy, all those disguises. Could it be him? That Saturday night, Daniel walked into the diner again, this time as himself. He wore a tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his posture radiating confidence. Clara froze mid-step when she saw him approach the counter. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Clara nodded numbly, leading him to a quiet booth in the back. Her heart raced as she slid into the seat across from him. "Why are you doing this?" she blurted out before he could even sit down. Daniel raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Doing what?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Clara snapped, her frustration bubbling over. "The letter, the hospital, my mom's care. Was it you?" For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He studied her intently, weighing his words carefully. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Yes," he admitted. "It was me." Clara blinked, stunned. "But why? You don't even know me." "That's not true," Daniel countered gently. "I've been watching you for weeks, Clara. I've seen how hard you work, how much you give to others without expecting anything in return. That night with Ethan, it wasn't just soup you gave him. It was hope, compassion, humanity, things I'd forgotten existed until I met you." Clara shook her head, overwhelmed. "But you didn't have to do any of this. You're a stranger." "No," Daniel corrected her softly. "Not anymore." He went on to explain everything. The guilt he'd carried for years over losing touch with kindness during his rise to success, the emptiness he'd felt despite his wealth, and how Clara's actions had reminded him of the values he once held dear. "When I saw you feed Ethan that night," he continued, "it brought me back to my own childhood. My family didn't have much, but there were always people willing to lend a hand when we needed it most. I wanted to pay that forward, to remind myself what really matters. And then I found you." Clara listened in silence, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude? Confusion? Anger? None of those emotions seemed big enough to capture what she was feeling. "But why me?" she whispered finally. "There are so many others who need help more than I do." Daniel smiled faintly. "Because you never stopped giving, even when life kept taking. Because you inspired me to be better. And because I believe you can do incredible things if someone gives you the chance." Before Clara could respond, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another envelope. "This is for you," he said, sliding it across the table. Clara hesitated before opening it. Inside was a check for $100,000. What is this?" she stammered, staring at the number in disbelief. "It's seed money," Daniel explained. "For whatever dream you've been putting on hold. Nursing school, maybe, or starting your own business. Whatever it is, use it wisely. You've earned it." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to argue, to tell him she couldn't accept it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she buried her face in her hands and let the tears flow freely. Over the next few days, Clara wrestled with conflicting emotions. Part of her felt unworthy of such generosity, while another part dared to dream for the first time in years. What if she could go back to school? What if she could build a better future? Not just for herself, but for her mom and everyone else she cared about. When she finally mustered the courage to call Daniel, he invited her to meet him at a coffee shop downtown. "I want to show you something," he said as she sat down across from him. He handed her a folder filled with documents outlining plans for a new foundation aimed at helping struggling families like hers. "I want you to run it," he said simply. Clara's jaw dropped. Me? Run a foundation? I'm just a waitress. You're so much more than that, Daniel insisted. You've got heart, Clara, and that's worth more than any degree or title. Besides, I'll be here to guide you every step of the way. For the first time in her life, Clara allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival. One where she could make a real difference, not just for herself, but for countless others. And deep down, she knew Daniel was right. This was her chance to turn kindness into action. Clara stared at the folder in her hands, its weight feeling heavier than it should. Inside were plans for a foundation that could change lives, her life, her mom's life, and the lives of countless others who felt invisible in a world that often overlooked them. But the enormity of what Daniel was asking hit her like a tidal wave. Run it? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, I don't even know where to start. That's why I'm here, he said firmly, leaning forward. You won't be doing this alone. Think of me as your mentor for now. But Clara, you're the heart of this project. You've already proven you have what it takes. Compassion, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the goodness of people. Those are qualities no amount of money can buy. She shook her head, still struggling to process everything. But why me? There are smarter, more qualified people out there. People who actually know how to run foundations or manage millions of dollars. Daniel smiled faintly, his eyes softening. Because they wouldn't understand what this is really about. This isn't just about giving handouts, it's about lifting people up, empowering them. And nobody understands that better than someone who's been on the receiving end of kindness before. His words struck a chord deep within her. She thought back to all the times strangers had helped her when she needed it most. The teacher who bought her lunch in middle school when her family couldn't afford groceries. The neighbor who babysat her little brother so she could work extra shifts at the diner. Those acts of kindness had kept her going when she wanted to give up. Could she do the same for others? I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted quietly. You don't have to be ready right away, Daniel replied. No one expects perfection from you, not even me. What matters is that you care. That's enough to get started. For the first time since this whirlwind began, Clara allowed herself to truly consider the possibility. Maybe she could do this. Not because she was perfect or qualified, but because she understood what it meant to struggle and what it meant to hope. Over the next few weeks, Daniel introduced Clara to a team of professionals who would help bring the foundation to life. They worked tirelessly, drafting mission statements, securing partnerships with local organizations, and designing programs tailored to support families in need. Through it all, Daniel remained by her side, guiding her without overshadowing her. But it wasn't easy. Clara faced moments of doubt almost daily. Imposter syndrome crept in whenever she attended meetings with executives or reviewed budgets filled with numbers that made her head spin. One particularly grueling afternoon, after a long session discussing grant proposals, Clara slumped into a chair in Daniel's office, exhausted. I don't belong here, she muttered, rubbing her temples. I'm not smart enough for this. Daniel looked up from his laptop, his expression serious. Do you think I knew what I was doing when I started my company? Clara blinked, surprised by the question. Well, yeah, you're a genius. Everyone says so. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. Let me tell you something, Clara. When I first started, I didn't know anything. I failed more times than I succeeded. But I kept going because I believed in the vision. And guess what? So do you. His words lingered in the air, grounding her. He was right. She did believe in the vision, a world where no one had to face their struggles alone, where kindness wasn't just an act, but a way of life. The official launch of the foundation came sooner than Clara expected. Held at a sleek event hall downtown, the gala drew hundreds of attendees, including philanthropists, community leaders, and media outlets eager to cover the story of a billionaire turning his fortune toward helping the underserved. Standing backstage, dressed in a simple black dress borrowed from Mia, Clara felt her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. She'd never spoken in front of such a large crowd before, let alone shared her personal story. You've got this, Daniel said, appearing beside her. His calm demeanor steadied her racing heart. As she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight blinding her for a moment, Clara took a deep breath and began to speak. "When I was growing up," she started, her voice trembling slightly, "my family didn't have much. Some nights we went to bed hungry. Other nights we cried because the bills were piling up and there seemed to be no way out. But through it all, there were always people willing to lend a hand, to remind us that we weren't alone." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "That's why this foundation exists, to be that helping hand for others, to show them that their struggles matter, that their dreams are valid, and that they deserve a chance to build a better future." By the time she finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Tears streamed down her face as she scanned the crowd, seeing nods of approval and smiles of encouragement. For the first time in her life, Clara felt seen, not as a waitress or a struggling daughter, but as someone capable of making a difference. After the gala, Daniel pulled Clara aside. "You did amazing tonight," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Thank you," she replied sincerely, "for everything. I wouldn't be here without you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Thank yourself. You earned every bit of this." They stood there for a moment, two people brought together by fate and kindness, united by a shared purpose. As Clara walked home that night, the city lights twinkling around her, she realized something profound. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning, and for the first time in years, she felt truly hopeful. Kindness isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention or applause. Often, it happens in the quiet moments, the ones that pass unnoticed by everyone except the person on the receiving end. A warm meal for a hungry boy, a listening ear for a lonely woman, a second chance for someone who's forgotten how to hope. For Clara Bennett, kindness wasn't just an act. It was a way of life. And though she never expected anything in return, her selflessness sparked a chain reaction that changed not only her life but the lives of countless others. Daniel Harper once told her, "True wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the impact you leave behind." Those words stayed with Clara long after their foundation launched. They reminded her why she started this journey in the first place, to remind people that they mattered, that even in their darkest moments, there was light waiting to break through. But Clara's story wasn't just about one man's generosity or one woman's resilience. It was about something bigger, the ripple effect of compassion. Every time Clara helped someone, they carried that kindness forward, paying it back in ways big and small. A single act could inspire another, creating waves of change far beyond what anyone imagined. As Clara stood outside Ruby's place one evening, watching families walk by hand in hand, she thought about Ethan, the boy whose life had unknowingly set everything in motion. She wondered where he was now, if he'd found the stability and love he deserved. Maybe someday he'd grow up and do something extraordinary too. After all, kindness has a way of finding its way back to you. So here's my question to you. What will your act of kindness be today? Will you hold the door open for a stranger? Offer a listening ear to a friend in need? Or maybe, like Clara, take a leap of faith and believe in the power of doing good, even when no one's watching? Because the truth is, we're all connected. Your kindness might seem small to you, but to someone else it could mean the world. And who knows? It might just come back to you in ways you never expected. After all, karma isn't just about balance, it's about opportunity. What will you do with yours?